Thank you.
Hello and warm welcome to all to this special public interview on hidden sides of the tobacco industry's charity and social projects in disaster. I'm Marina Ergemlidze, advocacy and communication expert at the Center for Democracy and Rule of Law in Ukraine, a think tank that has been working on development of key policies and laws in Ukraine, restricting the impact of tobacco products on the nation's health since 2010. Now I have the pleasure of holding the interview with Phil Chamberlain from UK, Deputy Director of the Tobacco Control Research Group at the University of Bath in UK. This research group is a partner of Global Tobacco Watchdog STOP, which stands for Stopping Tobacco Organization and Products. Phil, great to have you here.
Lovely, thank you very much for having us.
To say just a few words of introduction, you know, there might have been a time when tobacco control issues were concerned only communities of doctors and lawmakers. And today, however, this issue is known for broader audiences such as marketing specialists, researchers, media in Europe, in particular in Ukraine, especially in terms of such a phenomenon like social corporate responsibility. Given Phil's wide experience in studying tobacco strategy in different countries in the world, we would love to hear some hints on how to effectively oppose big tobacco, which presents itself as social responsible, regardless of social, health, and political harms. I expect Phil can share some forecasts, recommendations, even warnings regarding the above for Ukrainian concerned citizens. We used to know that corporate social responsibility is a part of reputational management and a standard. It's extremely rare to find a person who thinks that CSR is a negative PR tool. Also, in fact, corporate social responsibility emerged from a realization among transnational corporations of the need to account for and redress the impact on society. Speaking about Ukraine's CSR activities of tobacco companies, which allows them to engage in social support projects during the war, pandemic, this has enabled the industry to exaggerate it and overstate its small handout to those affected by the war. Leading tobacco companies in Ukraine boast they provided 22 ambulances and 1 X-ray machine for the hospitals, funded constructions of new apartments for 15 families refugees, and funded the opening of a new 5 social spaces equipped with generators, the internets where people can come to warm up, recharge their devices, drink the tea during the absence of electricity in the houses during the war in Ukraine. Why tobacco industry exploits Ukraine through CCR activities? Why do tobacco companies conduct CCR among the people affected by war in Ukraine now? How much does it cost to build 15 small apartments in Ukraine in Kiev suburbs? This is chicken feed with compared, for instance, which only taxes the tobacco companies have paid to the Kremlin since the war in Ukraine started, which are $9.5 billion in the past 2022. So whether marketing tobacco is antithetical to social responsibility or not. Now at this point, I must have asked Phil Chamberlain to say a few words about why tobacco industry exploits vulnerable people through its CCR activities. So I'm gonna do it. Let's start with a question. Phil, how do you think tobacco CCR during the disaster, the war, particularly the war in Ukraine, is hope or hype?
Marina, thank you for that. And I think you summarized those issues very well in that introduction. And I think it's important to remember, especially at times like this, when countries are very vulnerable, that is where the tobacco industry is looking to exploit the situation. I think we need to make sure that we're really clear about what the motivations are for the big tobacco corporation, the big 4 tobacco companies, as we call them, the ones that we concentrate on at the University of Bath and investigating. And their investigations over a number of years have shown a pattern of behavior where they look to exploit vulnerable situations. They look to find areas that they can open up new markets. they look to undermine tobacco control policies, and they look to take advantage where they can, where the authorities, where society is otherwise engaged in looking at other areas as well. So this is a vulnerable time, I think, very much for Ukraine in terms of its tobacco control, and it's to its credit, I think, that Ukraine, in terms of how it's passed legislation recently around tobacco control and how it's concentrating its efforts, has maintained that focus. But the tobacco industry will look to be able to promote its brands, to promote conversations with stakeholders. It will look to engage and be involved in debates with officials, and all of these are in direct breach of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, which Ukraine signed up to in 2006. So there's existing international legislation about corporate social responsibility. It's very clear about how tobacco's role in that needs to be prohibited. That won't stop the tobacco industry looking to overturn it. So I think it's very much a case to be concentrated, an issue to be concentrated on and looked at, and for Ukraine tobacco control and the wider society to be aware about what the potentials are.
Phil, in terms of corporate social responsibility, it is in vogue at the moment, but as a concept, it is vague and means different things to different people. What is known as corporate social responsibility in general?
Yeah, I mean, go back to the basics about what is it the company's looking to do, and that doesn't have to be actually tobacco, but it's about them looking to portray themselves as good corporate citizens. They more than just selling a product for more than they bought it, so making a profit, but it's about a company that is able to say that we contribute back. So that might be about they look after the environment, or the rewards that they have for particularly good employee relations, how they may help particular groups in society. So some companies make sure they need to report this. They have it as part of their operations procedure. I need to report how effective we are in employee relations, or how much we recycle, and those sort of things. And reporting that is part of corporate social responsibility. Fundamentally, with tobacco companies, it's about them promoting themselves and their brands. So this is about promoting them. So over and above anything that they say is a good thing that they're giving out, the purpose is about promoting them, and that's directly prohibited under the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. Article 13 on advertising, promotion and sponsorship talks about corporate social responsibility, and these are designed directly or indirectly to promote tobacco and its products. And we know that one of the biggest barriers to tobacco control and to tobacco cessation is tobacco companies. So making sure that they are excluded from those debates, make sure they're excluded as far as possible from health controls and discussions with officials is incredibly important. And the use of corporate social responsibility is a tool for them to get into the table, to start talking and be exchanging information, be seen, publicised in newspapers or online. It's a mechanism for them to be able to get around those particular rules, and it's one which they will throw money at, and one which also they know quite often they will target areas where people are particularly vulnerable. So where health systems may be under stress, they will see that as an advantage, that they can come in and look to be the knight in shining armor, as we sometimes describe it. But actually, their interest is not in solving a problem. Their interest is in promotion of themselves and promotion of their products. So for corporate social responsibility is wholly about that promotion aspect, if you like, and taking advantage of vulnerable areas.
Phil, and may I clarify, is the tobacco CSR always negative?
I would say yes, because it's quite clear within the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control that corporate social responsibility, they may need to report. They may need to report in their annual reports, or they may need to report into government accounting on particular activities that have taken place. But aside from that straight reporting, the use of CSR we've seen over and over again. This isn't a view based on on an assumption. It's based on the activities long documented over many years of the tobacco companies themselves and how they use corporate social responsibility to gain access to leverage extra coverage. And so you have to make very, very clear about the dangers of allowing that to take place. Because as you get in, then they'll be able to take advantage. So I think it's really important that having signed up to the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, countries abide by it.
In fact, we see that tobacco companies exposing CSR should be judged not simply as a corporate entity along standards of business ethics. It is negative force in the realm of public health, thereby rendering CSR, and it's like an oxymoron. And especially in Ukraine, now we see during the war, the tobacco CSR are really active, and I would say it's mobilized, and it is widespread even more than it was before the war. For example, in Ukraine, it is very popular for today among tobacco companies to deliver cigarettes to soldiers. It's not only cigarettes, HTPs, all electronic cigarettes, all the tobacco products to the soldiers, to the front line. And obviously, it brings a lot of bonuses and benefits to tobacco manufacturers, creates an illusion of social responsible brands, but at the same time, it multiplies tobacco addicted people immediately. And public discussion to shine the light for real goals of it and death from this tobacco charity are not acceptable by Ukrainian society yet, due to the high mental sensitivity of the issue for the defenders, for customers. Can you recommend what should be done by the anti-tobacco community in this case in order to quit deadly tobacco charity? Is it possible in general?
I think you raise a really interesting case study there, and I think by doing a couple of things there. So one is you're documenting what is taking place. You're providing the evidence about what it is, and I think also that you're looking to highlight what the concerns are about it as well. So it's not just about having this is the regulation or the law, it's about monitoring of that and enforcement as well, and quite often having to explain several times about why that this is something to be of concern. And I think that you quite often will come up against industry arguments. It's a special situation. We're just trying to help out. It's costing us money, but we would like to do it anyway. There are lots of arguments you will come around over and over again with the industry on this. We see this in a number of places different around the world. But I think making sure to document those instances as well should see that pattern, make sure it's reported appropriate to authorities, and the authorities are encouraged to make sure that they act to enforce the existing laws, which don't have a clause to say these are suspended in certain times. You're creating through this CSR activity for these tobacco companies, you're creating future risks. They're not putting money, they're not the easiest way for them to assist in terms of reducing future risk will be to stop selling their products. That would be the way to do it, but instead actually handing out products. Is that gaining new smokers? Is that gaining new customers? Is it people who are swapping from one brand to another? People trying different ways and different products and different companies. This is the company thinking in the long term. Maybe we've got new customers here. And that's a burden on Ukraine's health system for years to come. And so I think it's to be really clear about what the impact is of these CSR activities and documenting it and reporting it very clearly and making sure about how it is described. And this is not a humanitarian gesture. It is a sales tactic.
And my next question is why tobacco industry exploits the CSR activities among Ukrainians now, during the war. I mean, you can do this, we can try it in any other society which are able to buy more expensive products. Why you choose this vulnerable society, which is not aimed now to buy something to entertain, like HTPs or electronic cigarettes? So could you explain somehow this phenomenon?
Well, I think if you look at the way that tobacco traditionally approach regulations, they will first say that there's no need for this regulation. There isn't a problem. And if pushed, they may say, well, okay, so maybe there's a problem, but we can come to some sort of agreement. We can have a voluntary arrangement. And if pushed still further, okay, well, maybe we need a law, but perhaps we just keep it limited. We just kind of restrict it in one area. At every stage, the industry will do its utmost to reduce and dilute legislation in different areas, maybe on the description on packs, the taxation, on the sponsorship in different areas. So it doesn't like to be regulated, and it will do what it can to undermine that. And so in this case, one of the reasons that it wants to interfere and to undermine those regulations is because it wants to show that they don't really quite work. Maybe nobody's paying attention. Maybe nobody cares. Actually, people, they do work and people do care. It's what it's trying to do is make it out to be an ineffective process, one that's not appropriate tobacco, or the tobacco is special in some way. And we saw this during the pandemic, where they tried to get tobacco classed in different countries as a special item that that people needed to have access to. So what they're trying to do is make tobacco to undermine those regulations, which is even more important to make sure that they are still enforced. They see that Ukraine is in a vulnerable situation at the moment, clearly, in terms of what is happening. And so it's taking advantage of that by looking to disrupt legislation, looking to get itself back around the table, talking with people, being more present. There's a notion around tobacco control about denormalizing, making it abnormal to have tobacco cigarettes, such as not having it smoking indoors in bars and restaurants, and make that the normal thing rather than the abnormal thing. And the industry really fears that. It fears being seen as abnormal on outside. It wants to be on the inside, and corporate social responsibility is one of those ways it can do it. If it is putting a big advertising sign up on the central square in Kyiv that says buy this brand, well, we all know what it's trying to do there, and as a consumer, as a citizen, I can see that and understand what it's doing. It's much more subtle if perhaps something has been donated to a local school. Maybe there's very small sort of branding. How did this roof get repaired of the local school? Oh, it was really nice because this particular tobacco company gave some money. Oh, it doesn't seem, it's looking to use different ways that it can become a normal part, an accepted part as well. And I think that's very dangerous, especially when in situations as Ukraine is at the moment. There are a lot of other things going on, and people, obviously naturally concerned about a lot of other things as well. And it's looking to make sure that it takes advantage of that situation.
And about danger, what danger for state governments might be hidden behind the tobacco social projects during the war, or not only during the war, and not only for governments and for everyday people? So can we divide danger for governments and people? Yeah,
because it looks like you've got evidence of engagement, not necessarily at national, but certainly at local, at city, district level, in engagement with the industry. And the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, is about government engagement at different levels, not just at parliamentary level as well. And I think if they're looking to gain support and allies, this may be one way. We're making donations, we're helping people in your area, and the industry is looking to gain people that can speak on its behalf. It's got a very long tradition of trying to find advocates for itself. If any industry puts something out, we may be slightly suspicious. They're going to say their behaviour. Much stronger for them to have someone who can say it on their behalf, especially if they're respected locally as well. So I think, again, these CSR activities can be a way of finding allies who can speak for them as well, who help promote their messages. And that's dangerous, because I think, again, it looks to undermine tobacco control policies, ones which, Ukrainian health experts have fought and continue to fight very hard to make sure that they're there, those tobacco control policies, and have been, very strong in enforcing them so far. So I think it's a real concern about the use of these activities for the industry to get allies and people who will support and amplify their messages.
But industry will try to adjust its activities to reality. It will try to adjust its messages, its audiences. Maybe they'll try invent new products in order to reach broader and broader the consumers. And how do you think? Do the representatives from the tobacco industry are attentive and keep an eye to anti-tobacco society, anti-tobacco initiatives, or they are not involved in this process?
Well, I think they're looking to make sure they can undermine anything which may regulate their behaviour differently, will provide some check upon their operations. And I think, excuse me, I think one of the things that that sort of struck me was that Ukraine's come out of a pandemic, and then it's gone into a war situation. It's had a long number of years of being under pressure in different ways, and we've seen the industry react to those sort of different situations in different ways, but still looking about how they can gain an advantage through those different situations. So, and Ukraine has really had a number of years where it's been on the receiving end of quite coordinated industry activity, particularly around corporate social responsibility, first through the pandemic and now through the current conflict situation as well. And I think that is something which is important for globally for health professional tobacco control, to make sure that they can support Ukraine in terms of resisting that, because it's quite a concerted effort. I mean, I was looking at some figures about the spend in terms of corporate social responsibility for sort of just say for Philip Morris, so over the last few years, and I think you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars spent over since 2018, and that's gone up consistently. It's just dropped back in the last year, but it's gone up over the last few years, and that's money spent on schools, and it's money spent on some environmental projects. So they spent $7,000 helping to run a cleanup day. I mean, if you didn't produce the tobacco stubs in the first place, then you wouldn't have to fund people to go and clean it up, but and then get credit for having done that as well. One of the themes through that funding, when I was looking at Philip Morrison's hundreds of thousands of US dollars being poured in over the last few years, one of the constant themes is looking at young people. So there's schemes targeting young people, to youth leaders of tomorrow, and maybe it's just me, but I'm incredibly suspicious when a tobacco company targets young people, thinking this is a tobacco company looking about how it can attract another generation of people to its products, not about helping young people thrive and survive. This is about making them addicted to a new set of products. And I think that that's very cynical from the tobacco industry about how it wishes to use its funds in that way.
It seems like tobacco, Ukraine and vulnerable societies are like laboratories for tobacco CSR activities, where they test how it works. So it's about marketing, psychology approach, so everything, social psychology, behavior of society. So it's like laboratory. Can we use this term to explain the goals?
I think it's very interesting that to describe it in that way. You've got maybe you've got a special situation. You've got where enforcement is maybe difficult, and other things aren't as easy as they could be. But yes, it seems very much so that the industry has got opportunity to think about how it might post new products. It's got an opportunity maybe for illicit to pass through Ukraine into other countries as well. There is a opportunity, as you said, as a test bed for it. I'm never surprised. I never underestimate the tobacco industry's ability to look to take an advantage, and it wouldn't surprise me at all to think that they would approach it as a test bed, as an area they may be able to think about new marketing methods and ways of promoting their particular products, however they may couch it in humanitarian terms. I think that one should always be suspicious. I think you characterize it very interestingly.
Yeah, I want to shift the focus on the other side of this point.
Mm-hmm.
In beginning July 2023, in 3 months, there will be a comprehensive ban of advertising, promotion, and sponsorship of e-cigarettes and heated tobacco products provision come into effect in Ukraine. It's a big leap for Ukrainian lawmakers, MPs, government officials. However, we realize that there remain some loopholes for the tobacco industry marketing, especially in Ukraine, where, for example, in media, editors grab everything that advertisers offer them now because they need at least some income. Because of the war, the situation in media, advertising market is very bad. There are no advertisers. In the media, media should making compromises, cooperating with brands and groups of goods they might have refused before. For example, casinos, sports bettings, and tobacco. So what shows your research experience in different countries, whether total ban on tobacco advertising reduces motivation of tobacco companies to go ahead with CSR projects or not?
No, it's really interesting, and I think that certainly in terms of the forthcoming legislation for Ukraine, there's a great variety across the globe, and so drawing some comparisons can be difficult. But the evidence is pretty clear in terms of general tobacco sponsorship, in terms of limiting that has a definite impact on reducing demand, reducing knowledge and consumption around tobacco as well. And it's a really powerful tool, which is why they resist. And the point that you raised there is very important because you've got an economic issue regarding advertising. With where's income going to be coming from as well, and the industry has the ability to come in and help to try to solve that. It comes with a price tag, clearly, in terms of what the health burden will be as a result. And so I think it's incredibly dangerous for allowing the industry to exploit that economic vulnerability with their own sort of advertising. I think it's very important to be very strong on that. The legislation is coming into force, as you said, in July. It's a democratic piece of legislation. It's decided by society to protect themselves. They people have voted for their representatives to think that this is the right way ahead. One should respect that democratic process and not look to undermine it, but look to enforce it, and also make sure that you monitor and see effectiveness, and to make sure that it can be as useful as possible. So I think you're likely to see an awful lot of activity from the industry to undermine that. It's not going to work, things like that. I think to be very clear about where those messages are and to call them out, if you like. I think the industry will be looking to use a number of different tactics for that. But I think it's important to remember that this is Ukrainian people looking after Ukrainian people. This is them looking after their sort of health and what their future wants to be like, and one should respect and uphold that democratic health accountability there, rather than pay attention to the big multinationals and their need to pay shareholders.
And what about UK? Can you give an example regarding advertising or promotion and sponsorship in media? Is it allowed or is it prohibited for tobacco industry?
I mean, actually, in the UK, I was thinking about this in terms of, say, sport, because I think you raised some sport there. Was that sponsorship? Was that for a football club? That? So, it used to be that you would have in the UK for sport lots of competitions, sponsored by tobacco companies across a number of different sports, and that's all dropped away now. And now it seems very, when I was talking before about denormalization, abnormal, it would seem very odd to see that sort of advertising taking place. And so the effect within the UK has been pretty good, actually. One of the interesting things, when I was talking before, excuse me, about how the industry will look to find gaps that it can use. I'm thinking about sport. There is one way that I can see tobacco advertising in sports regularly if I want to, and that's by if I go on to Netflix and look at Drive to Survive, which is their Formula One program. So notionally, this is banned, but shouldn't be able to look to see tobacco industry advertising, but I can see it on Netflix when I stream it on my TV, and that's because the tobacco companies for within Formula One, sponsor a couple of teams, McLaren and Ferrari, and their branding and their corporate messaging is on these cars, on the drivers, and that then gets seen on Netflix series Drive to Survive, which is popular across the world and increasingly viewed by a younger audience, and they're being introduced to this branding and sponsorship without any sort of knowledge. It's not being corrected at all. So there are ways where this is coming in. There was a report which you can see on exposedtobacco.org, released just this week about the amount of advertising that's coming through on Formula One, from Philip Morris and from British American Tobacco, where they're putting money into that particular sport, and from that, it's finding its way into new audiences. So even in areas, the geographic areas where the legislation is strong and there's good enforcement, you still have to be aware. There will be other ways of sort of coming in as well, and it's not about being smug and think, oh, well, we've got that one sorted. Actually, you have to sort of constantly evolve, because the media landscape evolves and different other areas evolve, and the industry will take advantage where it can. And it's spending billions on Formula One sponsorship, and it's doing a very effective job at getting around advertising bans in a number of different countries. And so if you've got that in countries with extremely strong regulations, then that's a concern.
So do they use, I mean, tobacco industry, use any scripts for vulnerable societies, for well-being, for countries with high level of well-being? So it looks like they have scripts to follow for reaching their goals. Or it looks like that.
Well, they've got a number of years of, I mean, they've got a number of years of practice at this. They operate at a global level. They're able to look at, so when you analyze, for instance, on pricing and tax, about how they will look to work that at a global level rather than just at a country level, so they can maximize their sort of profits. So they're very practiced at getting their messaging correct, and they're very deliberate about the particular messaging that they use and how that's targeted in different places as well. So you might find, you would find, I think, refined messages in different countries as well that appeal to particular people, because countries are different. Their cultural setup can be different. Their things that they like, things that they dislike can change in countries, and so they need to reflect that as well.
Phil, it's time. I guess it's time to talk about cancel culture.
Okay.
I mean about a phenomenon in which those who are deemed to have acted or spoken in an unacceptable manner are mass boycotted or shunned. This shunning may extend on social or professional circles, whether on social media or in person, with the most high-profile incidents involving celebrities. Given the harm of tobacco CSR in CSR, why none of the tobacco companies in the world has not become an object for canceling yet?
I mean, it's something that's it's obviously a big debate in many different countries about that, as people test different sort of freedoms to speak, if you like. I think what we perhaps need to separate out a couple of things, but in terms of tobacco industry, the reason that the framework convention came into place was, one of the reasons was about the industry was not seen as a honest partner in terms of tobacco control, in terms of tackling the burden of tobacco disease, and indeed the biggest barrier to tackling that as well. That wasn't something that was arrived at overnight, something by long and very careful consideration, research, doctors and academics, politicians, advocates, NGOs, looking, understanding, seeing how the industry had operated, and understanding the nature about how it goes about its business. And so the carefully thought out in terms of how that legislation needs to be written to make sure that it could protect tobacco control policies, and all credit again to those within Ukraine who have fought for that as well. So I think that you're still looking at the big four companies in terms of JTI, Imperial, Philip Morris, and British American Tobacco, are incredibly powerful entities in terms of the money that they can wield, the political influence that they have got as well. People may worry about sort of cancel culture, perhaps on those who are less vocal, perhaps don't have as much support. I find it difficult to believe that giant multinational companies worry about that when their main product is about hooking and causing debilitating disease and death for a third of their consumers. I think the issue around cancel culture there is more about actually explaining exactly what it is that they are doing, and debating the arguments that they put through, exploding the arguments that they put through to justify their activities. I think worrying. I don't worry about their ability to buy airtime. They will pay for adverts, and they will buy airtime on YouTube and everywhere else. So I don't think they're at risk of losing out on airtime. What they're losing out is in terms of the debate about their role and their responsibility and what they need to be able to do to reduce that burden. And I think that's where they would worry about, and rightly so.
Phil, I have a question. Maybe it's too naive, but I have to ask: what should happen in the world to start a social mass ban, so initiated by society, mass ban of corporate social responsibilities of tobacco companies? Is it possible in general?
I think it's perfectly possible to, as much as we want to be able to achieve, it's incredible steps that many countries have taken over tobacco control over many years. And if you think about what was, 20 years ago or 10 years ago, about what we thought was that, I'm sure that could never happen, or that this couldn't be like this. And actually, we do find ways to make improvements. We do find ways that we can devise really innovative and powerful public health measures that protect the public. And I think the only thing that sort of imagination about what is possible is incredibly powerful. And I think that ability to imagine and then create quite possible is something which we know we shouldn't underestimate. And so I think in terms of saying what might be possible, is it a naive question? Not at all. I think if we want to envisage a future where young people have the best healthy start in life, they're able to access healthcare, they're able to not deal with the burden of disease caused by unhealthy products, because they don't have a choice about what they get to eat or they drink, because they're subjected to advertising that says that it's okay to smoke different ways. I think it's perfectly good to imagine a future which doesn't have that, a future which actually they have an opportunity to live healthy and fulfilling lives for as long as possible. That isn't something which tobacco companies can guarantee, not something they're interested in. So I think it's really, I think it's good to, I wouldn't call it naive. I think it's good to be optimistic, to be ambitious about what is possible. And I think that what many of the health advocates in Ukraine are proving is that ambition can be fulfilled.
Phil, I will wrap up our discussion, but I have the last question to you. How do you think, in which country, from your perspective, researcher perspective, in which country we have the best legislation of CSR activities for tobacco companies?
Oh, okay.
Do you know?
If I answer that question, then everybody else in the other countries are going to start, ringing me and giving me emails and saying, "Now, why didn't you mention this?" Now, I'd say there's a really interesting piece of work called the Global Tobacco Interference Index, Interference Index. You can look up on exposedtobacco.org. And the Global Tobacco Interference Index has been looking at a number of different countries, around about 80 over the last couple of years, and looking at its policies. Things like corporate social responsibility, around taxation, around plain packaging, and different areas like that. It's a very, very powerful and very well researched source of information to be able to look at that. You can look up for instance, on Ukraine. I've got the details here in terms of it's looked at Ukraine and its policies and giving it a score and how it's going and how it's going in relation to other countries as well. So I'd really suggest the Global Tobacco Industry Interference Index on exposedtobacco.org. It's a really useful way to have a look at how different countries are performing, if you like. Knowing that, countries have different pressures, if you like, and so, but looking at that, I think, is incredibly useful. I'd also really suggest to look at tobaccotactics.org in terms of information about industry allies, about background on corporate social responsibility, and information about industry itself. The University of Bath's Tobacco Control Research Group has been producing tobaccotactics.org now for a decade, and it's a really useful resource for people to look at to get information. And then finally, I would just say, forgive me, I'm talking a bit, but I'd say may well be that there are industry people who might be listening into this broadcast at some point and thinking about what it is they're doing. If they're unhappy about the way their industry is working, that they can always go on tobaccotactics.org and they can send us documents and information discreetly and anonymously, and we will make good use of that, and we won't compromise any whistleblowers that come to us, because it's really important that we're able to document accurately and fairly the activities of the tobacco industry.
Oh, thank you. That's important to know, Phil. And I'm glad that you told about it. It was told not by myself, and you announced and you told. And now I have the really last question. What do you think? What I'm sorry, just come over my mind just
Yes.
now. What do you think? What is the best way to convey the message to younger generation and message about what we were spoken today? About CCR? So I know it's quite difficult words, and it's not the type of manner what should be listened by this younger audience, but what is the best way to try to cope?
Well, I think in some ways on here you're looking at different platforms to communicate with people. My children aren't a newspaper reading generation, they're a TikTok generation. That's where they're getting a lot of the information from, getting that information to them, the platforms that they are using in ways that they can consume as well. And I think it's probably also getting people they will listen to. It's probably not people like me, it's going to be people more like their age, their peers, someone they respect in different ways. I think that the nature of your broadcast now is one of those ways of doing things differently. We very much consume information, especially visually, rather than perhaps in writing. And so I think you're going some way in terms of providing that information, short clips of information as well. I think it's really important to be able to just find out where it is that they are getting information to and going there, rather than expect them to come to you, if you like, and to think about who is it they'd like to listen to. It's a really difficult process to get right, but I think to approach it honestly and to not do it in a way which looks patronizing, but the messaging is powerful and clear from tobacco control side, and in terms of what they see. So I think we have the information and the arguments. It's probably just making sure to close that gap, and where is it they're talking to, because it is, as you said, incredibly important demographic, and we know from research elsewhere that the industry looks to sponsor music and sport. It has TikTok influences. It uses that social media to spread its message, but it's a shallow message about one item, one brand is cool and another one is not cool or something. We've got something much more powerful, I think, and so I think going to where they're consuming information and making sure that we're putting those that key information to them, I think is crucial, and I know that it's something that you and your colleagues are working on very hard on.
Phil, thank you. We have exhausted our time slot, and it was a pleasure for me to speak with you today and raise these questions. And thank you for your expertise. Thank you for your time. And this interview will be available on YouTube in Ukrainian and in English after today's broadcasting. So for those who want to see it again, it will be available very soon. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.